He fired me for hiding my pregnancy, but then he asked why the baby was named after him. The HR director wouldn't even look me in the eyes. She just kept tapping her pen against the folder, her voice carefully rehearsed. "It's not personal," she said, "but the board believes your omission reflects a lack of transparency." And given the competitive nature of the executive assistant role, I tuned her out. I had been with the company for 4 years, loyal, silent, efficient. I had pulled double shifts during product launches, flown across the country with 20 minutes notice, and memorized the CEO's schedule down to the hour. And now, pregnant and 21 weeks along, I was being let go under the excuse of trust. The truth? He didn't like surprises, and I had become one. I wanted to scream, "You should know better than anyone why I didn't say anything." But I didn't. I just nodded, signed the release forms, and walked out with my dignity folded in a cardboard box. He didn't even come downstairs, just sent a message through HR. I took the elevator alone, one hand on my stomach, the other gripping the box of my career. I didn't cry. Not yet. Not until I stepped outside into the cold, and the doorman, who always greeted me by name, said gently, "They shouldn't have done that to you." That's when it cracked. Not because I lost my job, but because I realized he never saw me as anything more than background. Until months later, when he walked into that hospital room and asked why my baby shared his name. For months earlier, I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after the product summit in Chicago. I remember the moment clearly, sitting on the bathroom floor of a hotel suite I had barely slept in, holding a test I wasn't ready to see. 2 pink lines. My hand shook. My heart raced. The father? Complicated. Powerful. Untouchable. Kai Tanaka, CEO of one of the fastest growing tech firms in the country. My boss. And for 3 quiet months, something more. We were careful, or so I thought. Late nights in the office blurred into weekends. There were no promises, just glances, accidental touches, and once a night I'll never forget in a hotel lobby in Singapore. But afterward he pulled away. Fast. Professional. Cold. I didn't chase him. I buried it. Moved on. Or tried to. But when the morning sickness came, I knew pretending wouldn't last forever. I stared at my reflection in the mirror and whispered, "You can do this alone." And I meant it. I didn't tell him. I didn't want pity or damage control. I just wanted peace. But peace is hard to come by when your boss starts noticing your missed meetings, your slower pace, your softer clothes. He never asked directly, just grew distant, short-tempered. Then one morning, I found an HR meeting on my calendar. No subject line, no explanation. I showed up already knowing. And when I saw the folder on the table, my evaluations, my time logs, my NDA, I realized he had made his decision. Not based on facts, but on fear. I was no longer convenient. So he erased me. I spent the next few weeks in survival mode. I sold my car, moved in with my cousin, took freelance work managing schedules for mid-level consultants who couldn't pronounce my name correctly but loved my efficiency. I went from corporate suites to coffee shops with spotty Wi-Fi and paper planners. But I didn't complain. I had a child to prepare for. I kept my head down. I didn't reach out to Kai, not even when I had to change hospitals because my insurance was canceled with the job. Not even when the receptionist at my first prenatal appointment asked, "Will the father be joining us?" And I laughed without meaning to. I gave my son a name early, something strong-rooted. And yes, it was Kai. Not out of sentiment, out of truth. Because no matter what happened, no matter how many meetings he skipped or emails he ignored, my child had a right to know where he came from. I didn't expect a fairy tale. I didn't even expect contact. I just wanted to build a life that didn't depend on being remembered. But then the night came, 37 weeks in, when I went into labor early alone in a rideshare, holding my breath between contractions. I gave the nurse his name for the birth certificate while clutching the sides of the hospital bed. And 2 days later, as I sat upright, holding my son against my chest. The door opened, and there he was, Kai, still in a suit, still composed. His eyes flicked to the bracelet tag on my baby's wrist. He read the name once, then again. "Is this a coincidence?" he asked. I looked at him, exhausted, unblinking. No. He didn't speak for a long time, just stood there in the doorway like someone had punched the breath out of him. I could see the storm behind his calm, his mind racing to control a situation that didn't fit into a boardroom. I looked down at my son, who was sleeping peacefully against me, unaware of the silence that now choked the room. Finally, Kai stepped inside, slowly, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to. "You should have told me," he said quietly. Not angry, not shocked, just uncertain. I didn't answer right away. I had imagined this moment 1,000 different ways, most of them louder. But now that it was here, all I felt was tired. "I didn't want anything from you," I said, "and I still don't." He sat down in the chair beside the bed, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. "Write my name." I took a breath. "Because for all the ways you disappeared, I couldn't rewrite where he came from. And one day he'll ask. I'd rather he hear the truth than feel like he was a mistake I tried to erase." Kai looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time he didn't seem like a CEO. He seemed like a man, completely out of control. "Is he mine?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes." He let out a breath and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. And then, almost to himself, he whispered, "I fired the mother of my child." There was no defense, no business plan for this, just silence and the weight of a truth too big to be buried in policy. He came back the next day. No suit, no tie, just a sweatshirt and tired eyes. I almost didn't recognize him. He brought a small stuffed animal, something too expensive, clearly picked by an assistant, and a bouquet of wildflowers that didn't match but still made me pause. He didn't try to touch the baby, just sat in the chair again, quiet, watching. "What's his full name?" he asked after a while. "Kai Emerson Lee," I said. He blinked. "You gave him my first name and your last." I nodded. Seemed fair. He let out a soft, humorless laugh. "I built an empire around my name, and now it's the only thing I gave to someone I didn't even know existed." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to be cruel, to remind him I gave him chances. I showed up. I stayed silent. I protected his reputation when I didn't have to. But none of that would change the reality now sitting in the hospital crib between us. A boy, breathing, real, his. "I'm not asking you for money," I said, "or time. I just wanted him to be born with honesty." He nodded slowly, eyes never leaving our son. "I need to fix this," he said, more to himself than to me. "Not for the company, not even for you, for him." I didn't answer, because I didn't know yet if that was possible. Some things don't get fixed. They get faced. And sitting there in a bland hospital room with no cameras, no press, no shareholders, he was finally facing it. Not the scandal, the child. Before he left that day, he stood by the crib for a long time. He didn't ask to hold the baby. He didn't take a photo. He just stared like he was trying to memorize every feature, every soft breath, every wrinkle in the blanket. "He has your mouth," he said quietly. I didn't answer. I was afraid that if I spoke, the fragile quiet would shatter. He turned to me once more before leaving. "Can I come back tomorrow?" I hesitated, then nodded. That night I barely slept. Not because of the baby, he slept better than I expected, but because my mind wouldn't stop circling back to that boardroom. The way they phrased it, lack of transparency, as if I owed them my body, as if hiding a pregnancy was the real betrayal, not the silence, not the power imbalance, not the erasure. I had always been efficient, composed, professional, never human, never seen. I thought naming my son after him would be a quiet rebellion, a reminder he couldn't scrub me out of his story. But now maybe it was something else. Maybe it was me finally claiming the whole truth. even the uncomfortable parts, even the ones that hurt. In the middle of the night, I looked at my son, his tiny chest rising and falling, and whispered, "You don't have to be proud of where you come from, but you'll never have to wonder who you are." And for the first time since losing my job, since being told I was disposable, I felt something anchor me again. Not because he returned, but because I hadn't disappeared. I had become more visible than ever. Kai showed up every day after that, not with gifts, not with grand gestures, just himself, quiet, uncertain, present. He'd sit beside the crib and ask small questions about feeding times, sleep patterns, whether I had picked a pediatrician yet. At first, I answered cautiously, unsure of his intentions. But he didn't push. He didn't try to reclaim control. One afternoon, while I was filling out insurance paperwork, he looked up and asked, "Do you remember Singapore?" I froze. Of course I remembered. It was the first time he had ever looked at me like I wasn't just a name on his schedule. We'd stayed too long after the client dinner. One drink turned into 3. We walked the city, talked about books, childhood, regrets. Then one kiss that changed everything. And by the next morning, he was already back to emails. "I thought it was just a moment," he said now, staring at our son. "I convinced myself it meant more to you than it did to me. That it was safer to let you go than let it grow into something real." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I had said it all already. In silence. In survival. In the decision to name my child after the man who forgot how to feel. "I was wrong," he added, "about everything." He looked at me then. "I want to know him. Not because I'm the father, but because he's mine." My heart didn't soften. Not yet. But something shifted, because for the first time I believed him. And for the first time he sounded like someone who knew the difference between ownership and responsibility. The day we were discharged, he offered to drive us home. I hesitated, but accepted, mostly because the thought of navigating the cold, the newborn, and 2 bags felt heavier than my pride. The car ride was quiet. No music, just the sound of tires on wet pavement and my son's soft breaths from the back seat. At a red light, Kai spoke. "I told the board I made a mistake." I looked at him, surprised. "You admitted it?" He nodded. "They weren't happy, but I'm not letting them pretend you were the problem." I turned back to the window, swallowing hard. "I don't care about the board." "I know," he said gently, "but I do." There was something in his voice I hadn't heard before. Regret without strategy. He parked outside the building I was staying at and got out to carry the bags up the stairs. I watched him move, awkwardly cradling the diaper bag like it might detonate. At the door, he paused. "Do you need anything?" I shook my head. "We'll be okay." "I know," he said, "but I still want to help." I didn't let him in. I wasn't ready, but I saw the change in his face when I didn't slam the door, just closed it gently. Inside, I set my son down and sat beside him, heart racing, not from fear, but from something slower, something almost like hope. Not for us, not yet, but for the idea that maybe, just maybe, the man who once erased me was learning how to see clearly, and that maybe I was finally done making myself small to fit into someone else's silence. Over the next few weeks, he kept showing up, not always at my door, but in the ways that mattered. He set up a trust in our son's name without telling the press, sent a letter to HR formally retracting their transparency claim, even offered me my position back, same salary, plus remote flexibility. I declined, not because I was angry, but because I wasn't going backward. I was building something new. Still, he didn't disappear. Once, he waited outside the clinic just to walk us home after a checkup. Another time, he spent an hour assembling a stroller he'd personally researched. "I didn't know which kind you'd prefer," he said, holding up 2 instruction manuals like a lost intern. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't redemption. It was awkward, honest, human. And that's what surprised me most. How little I needed a grand apology and how much I appreciated small, consistent presence. He started calling our son Kai Jr., and laughing nervously every time he said it. "He's going to hate this name when he's older," he'd joke. "Then he'll know who to blame," I'd reply. We weren't healed. We weren't a family, but we were trying. And one night, after putting the baby to sleep, he lingered at the door and asked, "Can I be part of his firsts?" First words, first steps, first heartbreak. I looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "If you keep showing up, not as the CEO, not as the man who vanished, but as the father he deserves, yes." And as he walked away that night, I realized maybe this wasn't the ending. Maybe it was the beginning neither of us planned, but both of us needed. I didn't tell many people who the father was. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't know the world that piece of myself anymore. Gossip had a way of finding its way through office walls, and I had no desire to become a cautionary tale or a whispered conference room myth. Still, the truth found its own rhythm. A former colleague texted me, "Is it true? He's the father." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. What mattered was what my son would know one day, not what strangers speculated. But the silence didn't last. One afternoon, a blog post surfaced on a tech site detailing my termination and Kai's quiet reinstatement efforts. No names were mentioned, but the details were unmistakable. The article went viral. Suddenly, I was the woman who named her baby after the CEO who fired her. Headlines twisted the narrative. Some called it poetic justice, others manipulation. But I stayed out of it. I kept walking my son in the park. I kept feeding him, rocking him, singing badly at 2 a.m. I wasn't interested in public redemption. I was interested in private repair. Kai called the morning after the story broke. "I didn't leak it," he said immediately. "I believe you," I replied. He hesitated. "Do you regret naming him after me?" I looked down at my son, wrapped in a blanket, eyes half open. "No, I regret trusting the wrong version of you, but I don't regret giving him a name that came from something real." He didn't speak after that, just breathed into the phone like he understood. For once, there was nothing to spin, only truth. Raw, inconvenient, and finally, free. In the weeks that followed, people treated me differently. Some with admiration, others with caution, like I was a walking headline waiting to explode. But I didn't engage. I went to the market, folded laundry, took photos of Kai Jr. trying to smile with his eyes half open. I existed quietly, deliberately. One morning, I received a package at my door. No return label. Inside was a simple frame with a printout of a calendar from the month I was fired. One day circled in red, the day of the termination. Below it, in Kai's handwriting, was a note. The worst decision of my career. The beginning of everything that matters. I didn't cry. I didn't frame it. I just tucked it into the back of a drawer, beside the baby's hospital bracelet and my old access badge from the company. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement, a small signal that maybe in his own way, he was trying to learn from what he broke. Later that night, we had dinner together for the first time, nothing formal. Just takeout on the floor while Kai Jr. napped in his carrier. We laughed over spilled sauce and cold noodles. It felt strange, safe, human. At one point, he asked, "Do you ever miss the life you had before all this?" I looked at him carefully and said no, because I didn't have a life. I had a role. He nodded slowly, and now. I looked down at my son, whose fingers had wrapped around mine even in sleep. Now I have something real, and I'm not letting anyone rewrite that ever again. One evening, as I rocked Kai Jr. to sleep, I found myself whispering stories to him. Not fairy tales, but real ones. About strength, about silence, about starting over. I told him how I once sat in a boardroom, unseen, unheard, until I chose to walk out. I told him how he was born on a rainy Wednesday, with no flowers, no cameras, just a mother who refused to let the world define his beginning by her ending. I didn't know if he'd ever understand the weight of his name, but I wanted him to grow up knowing that names aren't just labels. They're choices. markers of history, sometimes of redemption. The next day, Kai stopped by unannounced. He brought a box of books, parenting manuals, bedtime stories, and one thin notebook. Inside were notes he had written during every visit, observations, questions, things he wanted to remember. On the first page he'd written, "I can't undo what I erased, but I can learn to be present for what's still unfolding." It was the first time I believed he was becoming something more than a man trying to fix a mistake. He was learning how to show up imperfectly without applause. He didn't ask for another chance with me, and I didn't offer one. But we sat on the floor with our son between us, reading the same book aloud, taking turns, laughing when we messed up the voices. And in that small, quiet moment, I realized something. We weren't rewriting the past. We were building a new chapter, one where my voice wasn't silenced, where my child wasn't hidden, and where the man who once fired me was learning how to father the very person who carried his name. Months passed, and life settled into an unfamiliar rhythm. Kai Jr. grew stronger every day, his laughter filling the apartment like sunshine breaking through clouds. I watched him learn to crawl, then walk, each milestone a small victory. Kai and I kept a cautious distance, communicating mostly through shared care routines and occasional texts about appointments or supplies. But something shifted during one of those quiet evenings when Kai held our son for the first time without hesitation. He looked at me, eyes soft but serious, and said, "I don't want to miss any more moments." I nodded, knowing that healing isn't linear. It's messy, slow, but possible. I still carry scars. The loss of my job, the betrayal, the loneliness of those early months. But now I also carry hope. Hope that my son will know his worth isn't defined by the mistakes of others. Hope that he'll grow up seeing a mother who fought, not just for him, but for herself. One day, Kai Jr. will ask about his name, and when he does, I'll tell him everything. Not just the pain, not just the struggle, but the love, complicated, imperfect, and fiercely real, that made him who he is. Because in the end, that's what matters. Not how a story begins, but how it's told. And I'm ready to tell ours with honesty, with strength, and with the voice I never lost. One afternoon, while Kai Jr. napped, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Pictures from before the pregnancy, candid moments with Kai at work events, blurry shots from company parties where we smiled but never spoke about what was happening beneath the surface. I realized how much of my life had been compartmentalized, hidden away in folders and memories I rarely revisited. And yet, here was my son, asleep in the next room, a living reminder that those chapters weren't the end of my story. I texted Kai, something simple, "Thank you for showing up." His reply came quickly, "Learning every day." For him. It wasn't much, but it meant everything. That small exchange felt like a bridge, fragile, unsteady, but real. I don't know where this path will lead us. Maybe someday we'll heal enough to call each other family again. Maybe not. But the weight of the past no longer drags me down. I carry it with me, sure, but it doesn't define me. Instead, I choose the moments I create now, the laughter, the quiet mornings, the bedtime stories that weave our own narrative. And for the first time, I feel free. Not because the CEO of a powerful company recognized his son. Not because my name was cleared, but because I found my voice. And that voice will never be silenced again. The last moment of closure came unexpectedly. It was a rainy afternoon when I received a package at the door. No sender's name, just my address written in a familiar handwriting. Inside was a photo album. Old photos, mostly unseen, of Kai holding me during a company retreat, laughing with colleagues, and of the early days when we believed in something more. There was also a letter, brief and honest. "I can't change the past, but I want to be part of his future. Thank you for naming him Kai. It means more than you know." I sat on the floor with the album in my lap, rain tapping the windows, feeling a strange mix of sadness and peace. That was the last thread tying me to the man who once erased me. It wasn't an apology or a promise. It was a quiet acknowledgement, and for me that was enough. I closed the album gently and looked over at Kai Jr., now playing with his blocks, his laughter filling the room. This story isn't about perfect endings or fairy tales. It's about survival, truth, and the messy, beautiful journey of reclaiming yourself. And as long as I have my voice and him, I know the future is ours to write, no matter what it holds.